Dan Blocker had everything most actors would spend a lifetime on at the height of his fame, that chasing for a lifetime. Respect, stability, and a part that gave him a sense of permanent. That's why the conclusion was so abrupt. There was no accumulation that felt perilous. There was no instant that warned of impending calamity, only a feeling that things would soon be back to normal that never did. What came next was abrupt, upsetting, leaving a silence that gradually became louder. Dolphia Blocker had the opportunity to represent grief in public. Rather, she decided something much more uncommon: vanishing. She declined to take part in They transformed their last chapter into one of the quietest tragedies in Hollywood, the giant brought up under hardship. Little Joe could gain favor with his attractiveness, charm, and sense of humor, but it was Hoss who won them over. The Cartwright brother was large, reserved, a little naive, and incredibly endearing, anything unique. He had a kind demeanor, a blend of innocence and humility that it was impossible not to fall in love with him because of his adorable puppy dog charm. Additionally, the man who played him was the source of the spirit. Dan Blocker went into the planet is already bigger than life. Born in Dalb on December 10, 1928, he weighed an incredible 14 pounds, Texas. He continues to hold the record to this day, as Bowie County's largest baby ever born. In a sense, his existence began as a tale that others were compelled to share, and that theme persisted. When he was younger, his parents, Mary Arizona Blocker and Ora Shack Blocker, relocated the family to O'Donnell, a small town 40 miles south of Leach. After losing everything during the Great Depression, Shack, a former farmer, managed to save enough funds to open a supermarket. Dan assisted the family, who resided in quarters behind the store, out in whatever way he could, including delivering groceries to clients' vehicles. Shack made use of and quip with pals that since Dan was so large, he should pay them to hire him because he kept smashing stuff in the shop. Nobody knew at the time that his size would eventually become his biggest benefit. There were only about 800 people living in O'Donnell. People encircled by expansive ranch land. The main event was on Saturday nights. Interestingly, Dan himself was frequently a part of the entertainment. Word got out that Dan would be waiting for anyone who wanted to show off their strength. They would rope off portion of Main Street, and he would challenge anyone with the courage to do so. Blocker claims that he never lost a battle. He weighed roughly 275 pounds, give or take, even as a teenager, and he was aware precisely what he was able to do. He once asserted that he could defeat heavyweights because he was so sure of his strength that if Floyd Patterson had a few months to train and shed a few pounds, he would be a champion. That assurance wasn't he simply speak. He started playing linebacker at the Texas Military Institute when he was 13 years old. On the football squad. He received a scholarship at Sul Ross State University because he was so talented, and there he intended to continue playing football and studying English. He weighed close to 300 pounds and stood 6 feet 3 inches by the time he was 18. And as the years passed, he would get even bigger. However, a turn of events altered everything. For a presentation of Arsenic and Old, the school's theatrical club needed someone strong enough to lift bulky dummy props, lace. Dan was a fantastic fit for the position. Then someone advised him to enter a teen as the quirky nephew of the play Murderous Ants, Teddy Brewster. That his life was altered by a single moment on stage. The response of the audience, the vigor, the sensation of being seen took hold of him. He changed his major from English to the theater and didn't turn around. Following graduation, he declined offers to play professional football and moved to the East to pursue an unidentified desire he had. He gradually developed his craft by working in summer stock, repertory theater, and before landing a minor part in King Lear on Broadway. It was the beginning of something greater, even if the route would take a turn he had not anticipated. By the end of 1950, during the Korean War, Blocker was drafted into the U.S. Army. At Fort Polk, he received basic training. Louisiana, then training at Sapporo, Japan, for 9 months. After that, he was deployed to serve with Company FN Battalion in Korea. 45th Infantry Division, 179th Infantry Regiment. By the time his service finished, he was a sergeant. His battalion was positioned close to Chwon, an area along the Jamestown Line region that is currently in North Korea. They were drawn into fierce combat at a location known as Outpost Erie in March. Then, On May 25th, their patrol entered a communist ambush that was located far behind enemy lines. Outnumbered, and the Americans decided to fight after being pinned down. When one soldier sustained injuries, Blocker remained in his post for over 4 hours while under intense fire, firing back against small arms, mortars, and machine guns. His behavior, even if the injured soldier did not survive, managed to keep the enemies at bay. There was still more fighting. Starting in the middle, his regiment fought at Erie, Old Baldy, and other locations from June till the end of the month. Prior to defending Hill 223, Pork Chop Hill, the division was eventually removed after serving on the front lines for 209 days in a row. Back in July, after assuming the role of first sergeant, Blocker ultimately hospitalized for wounds sustained in battle. He was recognized for having saved the lives of several members of his unit. In August 1952, he was sent home. Among the men who worked for him, later, Gordon APTs expressed a great deal of appreciation for Sergeant Blocker. He was characterized him as robust, athletic, boisterous in a good way, amiable with everyone, and a born leader. Blocker, according to APTs, could smash a beer can between 2 fingers and still have time to watch out for each and every guy in his command. That Dan married Dolphia Parker in the same year. Having a new spouse and feeling taking on more responsibility, he went back to school and graduated with a master's degree in dramatic arts. Soon later, with a family that is expanding to assist boys David and Dirk and twin girls Deborah Lee and Dana Lynn, he accepted a position in Sonora, Texas, teaching drama and English in high school. He later worked as a 6th-grade teacher in New Mexico. With each step, moved him a bit more west, gently pointing him in the direction of the life he was destined to lead. The most misunderstood star in Hollywood, Dan Blocker brought the same level of stability to his marriage as he did to everything else. He cherished his role as a teacher, genuinely appreciated sharing his interest, and loved being among children for using language and acting with them. It's conceivable that, without realizing it, he altered a few lives along the road. There was one thing that everyone who knew him seemed to agree on. Dan's heart was enormous. Although he was occasionally irritable, he was equally quick to offer an apology and acknowledge his mistakes. When he didn't relocate his family to California in order to get attention or pursue stardom. The strategy was straightforward and sensible. Dan enrolled to UCLA to pursue a doctorate in dramatic arts, and while studying, he kept instructing. He was still passionate about acting, but it wasn't the focal point of his life yet. In the middle of the 1950s, that started to change when he began trying out for TV shows in order to earn extra cash. There were westerns everywhere. He was a perfect fit because of time and his size and presence. He made a little landing, gradually gaining experience in front of the camera by taking on roles one after another. Stanley Kubrick even attempted to cast him in Doctor Strangelove at this time. Following Peter Sear's withdrawal from the role of Major T.J. King Kong, Blocker's agent rejected the script, and Slim Pickens ultimately landed the part. It was one of those squandered opportunities that only makes sense in retrospect. In 1957, Blocker made an appearance in Outer Space Jitters, a Three Stooges short portraying a character named the Goon, who is credited as Don Blocker. He appeared as a bartender in a Sheriff of Coochie's episode that same year. Something made sense. Returning slipping into various roles on set made him realize how much he enjoyed performing. After that, the work began to arrive steadily. He had appearances in well-known programs as Gunsmoke, The Maverick, Rifleman, and Have Gun Will Travel, where he even had the opportunity to display his innate sense of humor. He appeared on Walt Disney's Zorro in 1958, as she was cast in a recurring role on the brief series Cimarron City. The brief run of the show likely felt like yet another disappointment at the time. However, in actuality, it was that he didn't realize he needed a break. He was able to assume the part that would define his life after it was canceled. He was selected by producer David Dort to portray Hoss Cartwright on Bonanza. Everything was altered. Dan postponed his doctoral studies and started working full-time. Actor, primarily because the part required all of his abilities. And it was worthwhile. Hoss was the show's heartbeat. If Little Joe was its main character. Emotional core, the steadfast spirit that kept the Cartwright family together. What's unexpected is that Bonanza didn't become popular right away. Ratings were so poor when it was aired that after just one season, NBC gave the idea of canceling it significant thought. A portion of the issue was that it had to compete with Perry Mason during its Saturday nighttime slot. In its debut year, the program failed to make it into the top 30. However, the network had faith in it. They shifted Bonanza to 9 p.m. on Sundays. At that point, everything at last clicked. The show started its long run as the audience increased and the ratings skyrocketed, yet that would ultimately last for 13 more seasons. Chevrolet emerged as a sponsor, which significantly increased the Season 2 ratings. Nevertheless, the program before it ever had a chance to prosper, it almost vanished, primarily because it was costly to manufacture. Thomas Sarnoff, an NBC official, subsequently disclosed that after the first 13 episodes, the New York network had intended to discontinue the show because it had gone overspending plan. The expense of color filming Bonanza was approximately $15,000 per episode in that initial year, which was a significant sum at the time. Sarnoff took over and vowed to keep the production under the allocated budget, which he accomplished. Using reason, Bonanza made it through and went on to become one of the greatest cherished television programs, with Dan Blocker's Hoss at the heart of everything. When America first encountered Hoss Cartwright on Bonanza, something clicked. This man, who was 6 feet 4 inches and weighed over 300 pounds, appeared to had come directly from a legend. But rather than being a terrifying savage, Hoss was kind, clumsy, humorous, and infinitely generous. He stumbled over his words. He made a mistake. He wore his heart on his sleeve, making the audience fall in love right away. The moniker Hoss itself was a humorous take on the word horse, a colloquial expression for large as a horse. It fit flawlessly. However, what really made the difference was how thoroughly Dan Blocker vanished into the part. Millions of admirers believe that Hoss Cartwright did not feel like a fictional character. He had a genuine feeling. And that's where the magnificent contradiction starts. Given that Dan Blocker was not at all like he played a slow, unintelligent ranch hand. He had a master's degree in theater, demonstrating his high level of education. He had been a teacher before his acting career took off. He was pensive, intelligent, and fervently religious, a politically progressive Free Methodist. He backed liberal causes, and even supported Eugene McCarthy. Behind the scenes, the man was observant, thoughtful, and interesting in their own right. However, in spite of their differences, Blocker and Hoss had one striking resemblance: a strong feeling of empathy. Blocker was a strong proponent of justice, kindness, and standing up for what was right. Silently, that belief influenced all he brought to Hoss. Children picked it up right away. Parents also did. Hoss never felt that was calculated or manipulative. There is nothing secret about him. You got what you saw. A decent man making an effort to greatest in a complex world. Early in Bonanza's tenure, Blocker had trouble with how much he was embracing the part. He subsequently acknowledged during the first he frequently thought that he and Hoss were the same person over the course of a few seasons. He spent spending a lot of time developing the persona, researching him, and attempting to comprehend how he believed the sentences started Tobler. Blocker did not experience this until perhaps the 5th season, self-assured enough to distance himself from Hoss. As soon as he realized who he was able to inhabit the persona every morning and go from him every evening, abandoning him to the sound stage. Nevertheless, Hoss continued to reside someplace within him. Blocker frequently recalled a statement made by Quaker missionary Stephen Greeley in the 18th century that if there is any nice deed or act of compassion should be carried out right away, since we pass this way just once. That way of thinking became Hoss's emotional core. Cartwright. Every kind gesture, awkward apology, and moment of devotion came from that straightforward notion. Blocker's toughness was exposed off camera itself in surprising ways. During a filming session, he was violently tossed from a horse and suffered a collarbone fracture. He did something nearly instead of going to the hospital. Unbelievable. The bone was fixed by him. Next, he returned, and completed the scene. He didn't take a break till later to recuperate. Ironically, he put on a few pounds while recuperating, and the same horse that had thrown him was unable to carry him when he got back to set. It was ideal. Blocker's quiet roughness, for instance. He didn't discuss the Korean War much to veteran, but his duty had earned him decorations. War permanently altered him. Manners, particularly in regard to firearms. Despite being based on frontier, outlaws, and shootouts, Bonanza Justice. Blocker publicly stated that although he personally hated guns, have to be armed on TV, he didn't want to interact with them in real life. His distaste toward firearms started once sitting on a hillside on a frightening night in Korea, realizing how helpless when someone else has a weapon, a human being is created. It broke that moment. Whatever sense of invincibility he had. Prior to the conflict, he had relished hunting. He had no firearms at all after the war. He wouldn't even let his Sansto go hunting. It didn't make logical to stop her from shooting animals for fun. He thought it was dishonest to call it sport until animals could be trained to shoot back. He took a tough position, considerate and intensely intimate. This produced an intriguing contrast. On screen, Hoss occasionally grabbed his holster. The man portraying him off-screen condemned the use of violence as a remedy. Blocker discovered on the Bonanza Cedar real family is uncommon in Hollywood. He became particularly close to Michael Landon and Lauren Green. When the series first started, Landon, who was still quite young at the time, was actively searching for this figure, held strong beliefs regarding character direction, storyline, and the show sought to leave. He might be obstinate. He could dispute with the network and producers. Executives. He was challenging to some. However, Blocker noticed something. Otherwise. Zeal. Landon had a strong affection for the characters and the show, and over time, Bonanza's strength was shaped by such ferocity. The 5 days a week, the ensemble spent a great deal of time together, frequently from early in the morning until late at night. That still made the decision to interact with people outside of work. They were so close that Blocker was Michael's best man, Lynn Noy and Landon's wedding. Blocker's schedule was dominated by Bonanza, although it had able to make appearances in a few movies, such as Lady in Cement and Come Blow Your Horn, both in addition to Frank Sinatra. Nevertheless, Hoss was his home, and television was his heritage. Blocker never lost sight of his roots, even in the face of his popularity. When was the last time you were in Texas, boy? Well, about a month ago, I was in Dallas. Oh, that was just lately. Yes. Despite moving his parents to California to be near him, he continued to pursue music in his hometown of Audinell, Texas, taking ownership over him. The recollection of the silence made people back home grin. Diligent young man who was constantly holding a book. For them, it was nearly it's bizarre to see the same child cross the Ponderosa every Sunday evening, radiating into millions of living rooms. Ultimately, Dan Blocker took action. Uncommon. He crafted a timeless character. Hoss Cartwright was more than merely a sidekick. He was more than comic relief. He represented decency in a harsh and gritty world. A man who genuinely believed in that symbol was standing behind it. Kindness, who chose gentleness despite understanding sorrow. The star who detested being famous. By the middle of the 1960s, Dan Blocker had risen to a position where most actors only imagine. His admirers loved him. He was admired by other artists. Youngsters saw someone they aspired to be when they looked at Hoss Cartwright. However, in a turn that seems virtually poetic, Blocker was not very interested in being well known. He cherished performing. He had a passion for acting. He was passionate about the craft. What he disliked was being acknowledged. Blocker and Jill Parker, his spouse, made a deliberate choice to lead a tranquil life. While other celebrities were purchasing opulent homes in Beverly Hills, or the Blockers, who hosted glitzy parties, selected a modest 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom home in the peaceful suburb of Northridge, which is roughly 20 miles away from Paramount Studios. It was cozy, useful, and a long way from the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. Due to acting was Dan Blocker's job. He wasn't after fame with music. He wasn't attempting to become a famous person. He was employed to provide for his family and to carry out an activity he truly enjoyed. He found the enormous attention that comes with playing Hoss odd, nearly awkward. He frequently appeared sincere in his perplexity that millions of people were so profoundly about a fake cowboy he portrayed on TV. That uneasiness only increased as Bonanza's fame skyrocketed. People would halt him in public. A few would seize his arm. Without asking, others would give him hugs. Numerous desired to sign autographs. Most had good intentions. However, Blocker battled the ongoing physical proximity. Touching someone he didn't know bothered him. Personal space was important to him. He respected the privacy of. Additionally, privacy was lost, nearly hard to recover. What celebrity did was the most difficult aspect of to his household life. Blocker and Parker had 4 kids, and Dan was extremely wanted them to feel normal as they grew up. However, even something as straightforward as getting the kids some ice cream might become into a public gathering. All ages of fans would congregate. Children would gaze, parents would indicate. There would be interruptions to conversations. The peaceful family moment would gradually vanish. He was aware of the admiration, but that did not imply that he relished the results. Nevertheless, regardless of how demanding his schedule became, Blocker never gave up on his goal of being a father. At home, he was a huge man with an even greater fun streak, just like you may expect. About 260 pounds in weight, he played about with his size rather than using it as a threat. After exhausting days on the shoot, he would humorously push past his boys and barge through the main door, simply to arrive at their electric raceway first. It was absurd. It was pure Dan Blocker and childish. That ridiculous fixation on racing toys cars exposed a fundamental aspect of him. Below the imposing frame and a man who never lost his sense of play was known for his booming voice. A man who recognized the importance of humor while also knowing when to be serious. The Blocker family mirrored that equilibrium. They did really have a swimming pool. Their driveway did hold, indeed, a few good automobiles. Parker was a 1963 Cadillac driver. Dan owned a brand new Corvette, Stingray. It wasn't about bragging, though. No marbles were present, and no gold-plated gates. No statues, no Hollywood extravagance. The house belonged to a family. Dan's social circle was possibly the most revealing aspect of all. Rather than Blocker remained close to those who had known him by surrounding himself with well-known performers and influential figures in the industry led him before to his rise to prominence. Previous educators, longtime Texas friends, folks who, long before America knew him as Hoss Cartwright, recalled him as a contemplative, bookish young guy. He and Parker avoided attending large Hollywood parties. They simply weren't meant for that entire situation. They weren't pursuing relationships or interacting with the appropriate individuals. They favored familiar faces, peaceful evenings, and discussions that had real significance. Dan Blocker's reputation may have altered how the world perceived him, but it never altered his identity. Rather than adapting to the demands of famous life, he just moved away from the music. No secret mansion in the hills, no guarded neighborhoods. After packing, he relocated to another nation. Blocker's decision to move his family to Lugano, Switzerland, was an extraordinary one that neither a business transaction nor a tax plan inspired the concept. It started with a magazine, something straightforward and somewhat poetic. Blocker liked to read one specific National Geographic feature on the lake regions of southern Switzerland and northern Italy, stopping him in his tracks. Mountains, lakes, and ancient European villages appear on page after page. Something deep within him stirred. He and his wife, Dolphia Parker, had previously traveled to Europe once. Additionally, after witnessing, he told her that they had to see that lake area if they ever went back because of those pictures they did years later. The Blocker family journeyed through Switzerland and northern Italy, traveling to locations such as Lake Major, Lake Co, and lastly, Lugano. And at some point throughout that trip, something clicked. Lugano performed it felt correct, not simply lovely. Blocker would subsequently claim that it was the most beautiful location he has ever seen. More significantly, was a sense of familiarity. Blocker had been longing for what the town has to offer. Calm. No crowds, no strangers grabbing his elbow at the grocery store, and no autograph seekers stores, just peaceful streets, mountain air, and a more leisurely pace of existence. The pragmatic components came together rapidly. In Lugano, the family located an American school for the kids. The children started picking up new languages. Suddenly, Europe became their extended backyard, with nearby nations just a quick train journey away. By 1970, a choice was made. In Switzerland, the Blockers were beginning a new chapter. Blockers were still responsible for the America. Naturally, Bonanza was one of the most popular television programs ever, and he stayed dedicated to it. But he had a straightforward idea. He would do this whenever he wasn't actively filming to go back to Switzerland to spend time with his family. He didn't think the move was about getaway. It had to do with preservation. Rumors spread almost immediately. Some believed he had fled the United States due to financial difficulties. Others conjectured concerning investments, taxes, or covert transactions. Blocker silently disregarded everything. He was already a millionaire thanks to Bonanza. Living abroad actually entailed the difficulty of dual citizenship and increased taxes. Should Switzerland did not reduce his expenses, rather, it increased them. Never was money the point. The peace, the alone, and the opportunity to stroll were what really drew him in down the street like an ordinary man. Additionally, there was a minor, almost comical element that was advantageous to him. Swiss television did broadcast Bonanza, but only in German. Additionally, in southern Switzerland, few people attended the show in areas where Italian was the primary language, because indicated that Dan Blocker was not Hoss Cartwright in Lugano. He was simply Dan. The anonymity was invaluable. Similar to James Arnes, another well-known Western star, Blocker had never felt at ease with the world of celebrities, Gunsmoke. He did not find pleasure in premieres. He wasn't a headline chaser. He was not interested in becoming well-known in Hollywood. He wanted genuine existence. In Lugano, he discovered it. He could concentrate on being a private citizen, a husband, and a father. He could observe his kids' development without being interrupted by cameras, and thronged at a coffee house would not bother him while he sat there. He was able to breathe. It was worlds distant from the Ponderosa Ranch's dusty paths, worlds away from studio lighting and sound stages. Additionally, that distance was significant since, although millions every Sunday night, Dan Blocker was viewed by many as a tall cowboy. He was subtly deciding on a completely different persona. Not like a star, not as a parent who desired normalcy, a husband who loved his wife, and an icon for his children, and a considerate man who merely wants some tranquility in a stunning region of the world that was given to him by Switzerland. Additionally, Dan Blocker's tranquil life meant more than whatever level of notoriety possible. Dan's terrible demise and terrible conclusion. Blocker and his spouse. Dan Blocker came back to the U.S. in 1972 to commence production on the final season of Bonanza. But there was a problem. People in his immediate vicinity was able to view it. Blocker was weak, exhausted, and extremely worn out. The large man who had appeared unbreakable had lost his normal vigor. Worried when he arrived at the hospital, the physicians found that he needed to have his gallbladder removed. The process itself was regarded as standard. One of the most popular procedures was and is a cholecystectomy that carried out operations in the United States. Each year, millions go through it. There wasn't cause for concern that anything would go wrong. Blocker had withstood much more circumstances of his life, such as fighting in Korea. In contrast, this felt controllable. Everything seemed to go well with the surgery. Later, Blocker thought he was the gallstone discomfort that had plagued for years finally gone. For the first time in a long, he was relieved at the same time. He was sent home to recuperate, feeling hopeful about returning to the workplace and completing the season. Afterward, a few hours later, everything was altered. Blocker felt lightheaded all of a sudden. He reported having serious suffering. His wife Dolphia hurried him back to the hospital after becoming alarmed. He never returned. Out. Dan Blocker passed away from a pulmonary embolism later that day. A clump of blood had reached his lungs, obstructing a significant artery. The demise was unexpected, unanticipated, catastrophic. He was alive at one point, making plans for the future. He was gone by the next. Dan Blocker was only 43. Then instantly, shock spread outward. His wife's partner passed away. 4 kids lost their dad. A brother was lost by the Bonanza cast. Landon, Michael, his best friends, Lauren Green, and others were devastated. Millions of fans as well people all throughout the world found it difficult to understand how someone who felt so solid, so permanent might disappear in an instant. At the pinnacle of his life and profession, following Dan Blocker's untimely death left Gia at a loss. She may have stayed in the eyes of the people. She had the option to do interviews. She had the opportunity to use her husband's celebrity as a platform for herself. None of it was her choice. Gia chose to fully avoid the limelight instead. She concentrated on keeping their kids safe, maintaining their privacy, and keeping Dan's memory alive with honor. She never got married again. She didn't look for attention. She never made an effort to change the past. She had a calm, purposeful life that exactly how Dan and she had always wanted. Due of Gia's avoidance of the media, entirely, a lot of information regarding her final years is still unknown. Additionally, that was just the way she desired it. For her, peace was more important than public curiosity. She eventually died quietly as well, leaving behind kids and grandchildren who upheld the principles she and Dan had espoused.